So, Lone Rider here with my 2008 Raleigh Grand Sport. And this was a bike that I put a lot of miles on way back when. And I did a lot of the modifications that I talked about. This has a 50 tooth outer chainring, um, the standard inner, and then the double's like a 28 from a mountain bike. Not the double, the inner gear. So it's a triple, but it's basically just it's a semi-compact double with a bailout, inner bailout gear. Um, and like I said, guys like me have been tweaking gearing for a long time. This bike went through a lot of changes over the years, and I still ride it, and it still is going strong. Um, those changes, that sort of philosophy of use has been a part of the bike industry for decades. The invention of the mountain bike is a big one. That started with a bunch of guys in their garages putting together clunkers. Next thing you know, it represents like a major category of bikes. Um, Compact gearing, for example. All of these things started with people tinkering and then became something that was marketed. Remember the Stingray bikes? Schwinn and a whole bunch of other companies famously made them. Well, it started with people building them on their own, and then the bike industry people looked at it and said, "Oh, it looks like there's a market for that." Now that didn't last. Outside of people who collect them, there's not really a market for those anymore. But many things throughout the history of cycling started with people in the market, the customers, the cyclists, tinkering and putting things together and seeing what would work, and then it became something that there was a demand for, and so the industry marketed it. Now, that's not to say the cycling industry itself hasn't also come up with some great ideas. Where would mountain biking be without if RockShox hadn't invented their very first prototype mass-produced suspension fork, etc. But generally speaking, a lot of the things that we take for granted didn't begin on a drawing board in some office. They began in somebody's garage. And like I said in part one, that's been a big part of the bike industry. Not a major part necessarily, but a big part, and a big part of a lot of the things that we take for granted as part of modern cycling. However, where the bike industry is going now is very different. What they're doing is they're creating things that there isn't a market for, and then trying to convince people that they need to buy them. Whether it's press fit BB30 bottom brackets, whether it's through axles on road bikes or on the rear of mountain bikes. I understand the demand for a through axle on the front of a mountain bike if you're racing or riding at a competitive level. Obviously, there's plenty of us riding around on mountain bikes with regular quick release on the front and the back, and we do fine. But yeah, if you're racing or whatever, anything that makes it a little lighter or stiffer helps. Same thing with BB30s on the road racing bikes. I mean, if you're getting a new bike every season or you have a team mechanic to look at the bike after the race, you don't care if there's no adjustment and the bottom bracket's going to start squeaking. But if you own the bike, well, that's a very different story. Most guys I know who have BB30s get really annoyed at the squeaking. And a lot of times the only thing the mechanic can do is pack it with grease to stop the squeaking, and then 6 weeks or 6 months later, depending on how much you're riding, it starts squeaking again because the grease is thinned. All they can do is pack it with grease. And of course, to get them out of the frame, I don't know if you've ever seen somebody work on a bike with a BB30 bottom bracket or any of the other press fit variants. And by the way, those aren't a new thing. They tried them back in like the 60s and 70s with the Lambert and Viscount bikes. You saw where those went, nowhere. But to get the press fit bottom brackets out, they basically have to bang on them with a mallet. Yeah, so you've got your $5,000 carbon Cervelo frame in a work stand, and some guy's banging on it with a hammer, essentially. Now, a trained mechanic probably isn't going to miss and hit the bike frame, but is the stress on the bike frame all that good for it anyway? Just even if he hits where he's supposed to, that's the, now that's the sacrifice you make for the lighter and stiffer bottom bracket. Now, if you're a racer who gets new stuff every season, that's fine. If you're a regular rider, whether you're an avid rider or beginning rider or whatever, you got to take care of your stuff. It's got to last you for a long time, and you really don't want to spend $5,000 on a bike that's going to have a squeaky bottom bracket because it's designed that way. Now, I also see another aspect to this. Not every shop does really good repairs, and so I think there may be a tendency within the bike industry for them to try and make parts that don't need to be serviced by the shop or adjusted by the shop before the bike is sold. Every bearing surface on your bike should ideally be adjusted by the shop before it goes out the door. So if you don't have sealed bearing hubs, there's a bearing on each side of the axle on each wheel. There's the bearings in the bottom bracket. There's the bearings in the headset. And then you need to grease and adjust every bolt, whether it's the bolts that clamp the wires and the cables and the brakes, the bolt that clamps the shifter, the bolts that hold the cranks on, the water bottle bolts, the bolts on the headset. I mean, this headset has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bolts just on the headset. You've got a 4-bolt faceplate, the top bolt, and then the 2 bolts on the clamp. A lot of shops don't do that sort of thing. And so I understand where they can, the industry might also be trying to sort of make it idiot-proof so that you don't have people who have, if you don't have adjustable bearings, then you don't have to worry about your bearings wearing out because they're not adjusted. But there's always a trade-off, and that trade-off is bottom bracket that, because it can't be adjusted, is going to start squeaking. The through axles are another thing. I understand putting a through axle on the front fork because the front fork isn't as sturdy. It's only attached at the top, especially on a mountain bike where you have a shock. So that makes the front fork a little lighter and stiffer. Now, is that something that they should do for every mountain bike? No, because there's a downside. You lose compatibility with all other different types of wheels. It takes longer to take it on and off because you have to unthread it all the way. Whereas a quick release, you usually have to just and it drops out. And even with the lawyer lips and tabs on some new forks, they started doing this in the 80s because they were concerned about idiots not putting their wheels on right and the wheels coming off. It used to be, for those who aren't old enough to remember, a front quick release was just like the back. You drop the lever and the wheel would come straight out. Now on a lot of them, because they have these little tabs, you got to drop the lever and turn it 1 or 2 turns to get the clearance to drop it out. However, fiddling with the nut for 1 or 2 turns is a lot different than completely unthreading the thing. And to be fair, a lot of us file down those lawyer lips so they're not an issue. This is easier on, let's say, modern road forks because the forks, maybe, let's say, carbon, but the dropouts are aluminum, which is a lot easier to file, and then you don't have to worry about it rusting where you filed it like you would with a steel fork. I mean, I have steel forks on my 2 custom bikes, but those were custom bikes, so they weren't made with lawyer lips to start with. So that was never an issue. The back, though, does it make sense to put it on the back? No. Your rear triangle is a lot stiffer, even on a dual suspension bike where there's hinges and pivots and things. There's still many more attachment points all up and down the line than there is on a fork where it's only attached at the top by the crown. So I understand putting or marketing a through axle on competitive level mountain bikes. I don't understand marketing it on all mountain bikes, and I don't understand putting it on the back. What I really don't understand is putting it on road bikes and cyclocross bikes. Really, disc brakes on road bikes, that's another thing. If you want to get a traditional road bike with rim brakes, you're kind of out of luck in many places now. A lot of companies are just selling disc brake road bikes, or if they offer a road bike with rim brakes, it's only like 1 or 2 models, and the vast majority of their lineup is disc brakes. Clearly, they seem to be trying to push people in that direction. The question is it a direction that people really want to go in? Think about the market. Road bikers are often concerned about how much things weigh. They'll pay money for something that weighs a few grams less than something else, sometimes obscene amounts of money. And at a competitive or racing level, that might actually make a difference. Every little bit helps. All those guys are pretty much at the same level of fitness, so any advantage they can get is going to be an advantage. For the average recreational rider, even the average avid rider, it's not going to make much of a difference. I'll be brutally honest, not to be vulgar, but if I go to the bathroom before a ride, I lose plenty of grams. So, for me, it's nice to have a light bike just to be able to have nicer stuff, but How much do I benefit from it? Um, but that said, that's part and parcel of the culture of roadieism, or road bikes as it were, is to constantly want lighter stuff, or at least stuff that's light enough that it's not a hindrance. Disc brakes are a lot bulkier and a lot heavier than rim brakes. So by putting disc brakes on almost all your road bikes, or all your road bikes, depending on the company, and then marketing that, do you understand your market? You're marketing something to the market, namely the road bike market, where it's least likely to be accepted because its downsides are that much more likely to be objected to. And they don't really offer any benefit for road bikes. I mean, the main advantage of a disc brake is that centrifugal force throws crap and mud and water away from the center of the spinning wheel, so that your disc brake stays cleaner and it stops better when in inclement conditions, when it's wet, muddy, dirty, dusty, whatever, than your rims do. Anybody who's ever come back from a ride in the rain knows that stopping with wet rims is a bitch. Disc brakes, it's a little easier because they're in the center of the wheel. So the main advantage of disc brakes is your stopping power remains constant, whether it's bad weather or good weather. That said, while some roadies might ride in the rain, how many people are getting mud all over their bikes, etc.? There's a reason that these things are more common on mountain bikes than on anything else. You do sometimes see them on touring bikes and other things. With that, I'm not sure how much of it is the increased stopping power because of the weight of a loaded touring bike, and how much of it is the fact that bikes like touring bikes often use wide tires, just like mountain bikes, although not as wide. And so the clearance issues with getting the tires in with standard side pulls, whereas if your brake is located on the hub, you don't have any tire clearance issues with the rim brake impeding the fitting of wider tires. But that said, for the average roadie, we want rim brakes like this, okay? We don't want disc brakes. And so they're marketing something that nobody wants. Just like a lot of these bikes with the through axles. What's the, outside of the competitive riders or whatever, what's the point? Well, they've tried to create a point by touting the benefits. It's stiffer, it's lighter, etc., totally ignoring all the downsides. Loss of compatibility with other wheels. It takes longer to remove because it threads completely into the other side of the fork. Every time you take it on and off, you risk stripping the threads, damaging the axle and or the fork of the frame. And it's just something that people, is it something that would be nice if it was offered as an option? Maybe, but should it be standard? I don't think so. I mean, a lot of these things you're losing as much as you gain, if not more so. And my problem is the why. If there was a huge demand for this, that'd be one thing. If people were hodgepodging together through axles in their garages, and the bike companies looked at it and said, "Oh, let's sell something like that," that'd be one thing. There's not a huge demand for this stuff, or there wasn't until the bike company created them and then started to market them. And the reason I think they're trying to do this is because they're trying to create a reason to sell bikes. How do you sell bikes to an experienced rider who might have 5 or 4 bikes, or even a dozen bikes? He's got a road bike, a track bike, a folding bike, a touring bike, whatever. How do you sell him more bikes? You got to sell him more bikes to stay in business. How do you do it? Well, you make his old stuff seem obsolete by touting these new things and creating a demand for them. So you've already got a road bike. That's great. We have a disc brake road bike. You got to buy one of those now. Keep up with the Joneses. Here's my problem. Why would they even be doing this? Well, I think the bike industry is looking around at the next generation and seeing that they spend all their time on their iPads and their Xboxes, and they're not seeing them as the next generation of riders. They're not seeing that there's going to be as much demand for outdoor activity there. So what they're instead doing is trying to figure out how they can milk all they can from the existing marketplace, rather than bring in new participants to the sport or activity or way of life, if the term sport offends you. My problem with this is twofold. The first problem is that obviously it's a suicide pact for the industry. If your goal is to just constantly milk more and more money from a constantly static and then ultimately shrinking and declining market, Um, you know, what happens when all those existing riders are old or died of old age or whatever? Where's your new market, right? So that's it. It's long term. It's a bad business model, and of course, it's also bad for the sport of cycling because then where will future cyclists who do want to ride get their stuff if the bike business goes largely kaput? Second thing is whether you're talking about new riders in the future who want new stuff or whether you're talking about guys now who are riding. If the bike industry changes the types of bikes it sells and starts selling stuff that people don't want, it's almost as bad as if the bike industry wasn't around, isn't it? Because they're making plenty of bikes and they're making plenty of equipment, but they're making bikes and equipment that I don't want. They're making road bikes that don't appeal to roadies. They're making recreational mountain bikes that don't appeal to recreational riders. They're selling people really expensive, high-priced, non-adjustable bottom brackets that squeak and have to be removed by hitting them with a hammer. The long term, what happens to cycling and the cycling industry in the long term is bad enough question. But my question would be, in the interim, what happens to those of us who just want decent bikes to ride? I look at some of the new stuff, and it's not that I'm more of a traditionalist. Yes, I have some aluminum frame bikes. This is one of them. I really love my old steel frames. Steel is real, as the old saying goes. But it's not just frame material and frame design. It's a question of componentry. Do I want a bike with, a road bike with disc brakes? Do I want a bottom bracket that squeaks and that I cannot work on? Do I want through axles on my frame so I lose the ability to switch wheels, etc.? I mean, these are just a few of the things they're doing that I don't. We could talk about gearing. 7-speed and 6-speed were kind of lackluster. 8-speed was perfect as far as I was concerned. 9-speed's okay. 10 and 11 speeds are excessive. You get really bad chain line when you're in extreme positions like this. You get really thin chains that are more prone to wear out. The gears themselves wear out more often, and everything is like really, really, really expensive. Replacing an 8-speed chain or even a 9-speed chain isn't that bad. Replacing a 11-speed chain, oof. And then your gear set on the back, your cogs, instead of maybe, 60, $70, you're looking at, $270. I mean, also, more importantly, when you're riding the bike, I have no 11-speed bikes, but I do have one bike with 10-speed. That's my black Rally Revidio. That was in part one. And, most of the time I'm fine on that bike, but there are times, especially over rolling hills, where I'm constantly shifting back and forth, where it feels as if I'm never in the right gear. I don't know, maybe that's all part of a sinister plot to wear out the drivetrain prematurely, so you have to buy more stuff. But, a lot of us who are interested in riding and working on our own bikes, we don't necessarily need the next big thing. We just need something that's going to work and it's going to do what it has to do for that situation and that type of bike and how it's ridden. And I'll give you a hint. Most road riders don't want heavy, clunky disc brakes on their bikes. Most, casual mountain bike riders don't need or see the need for, until they've been, given the Kool-Aid by the bike industry, see the need for through axles on front and rear wheels. And like I said, everybody I know who has a bike with a BB30 complains about the squeaking. So, to me, I look at where the bike industry is going and I see that in a desperate attempt to drum up business, they're creating categories and types of products that not only nobody really wants until convinced otherwise by a massive marketing campaign, but where they're actually not offering anything that people do want. It's one thing to make to sell bikes with, if they made one model road bike with disc brakes, a standard road bike, not a gravel road bike or a touring bike or a cyclocross bike, a standard road bike with disc brakes. And that one model doesn't sell all that well. Okay, that's fine. Now what happens if their entire lineup is standard road bikes with disc brakes? Not only are they not going to sell all that well and potentially endanger their business, but for the rest of us who want to buy a regular road bike with rim brakes, what do we buy? We're stuck with the used bike market, and that's it. We get a custom steel frame made. So, the cyclists are left in the lurch, and the bike industry goes meandering off down a dead-end road somewhere. And, I got to really wonder what people are thinking. And at the end of the day, let's not forget, people do this because it's fun. Nobody rides a bike because, some people might do it because they want to stay, active or just be outdoors, but, get fit or whatever. But, for the vast majority of us, we do this because it's fun. And there's a lot of stuff that comes together to make it fun. But part of that is the equipment. You need the right equipment. Is the bike industry listening?